welcome to Break the Loop. This is the place where shadows transform into personal power. Here we break the loop, shift timelines, and step into the highest version of ourselves. And today, we're going deeper, into the mechanics of reality itself, and the identity shifts that allow you to change your life faster than you've ever imagined. This is episode 14, The Quantum Shift, how to change your reality fast by aligning identity, emotion, and timeline. A quantum shift is not magic, luck, or chance. It's not some mystical force picking you up and placing you somewhere else. A quantum shift is when your identity, emotional frequency, and nervous system align into a new pattern so powerfully that the old reality no longer fits you. It's when you stop choosing from who you were and start choosing from who you're becoming. A quantum shift is the moment your internal architecture updates. The story collapses, the emotion changes, the narrative dissolves, the belief rewrites itself, and a new version of you snaps into place. It feels fast, but it's not random. It is the moment the higher timeline becomes more energetically true for you than the lower one. Once that happens, your external reality begins to reorganize around your new identity. Your brain does not show you reality. It shows you what matches your identity. The subconscious filters every moment through a single question. Who am I right now? If your identity is still tied to fear, scarcity, abandonment, or self-doubt, your brain will highlight anything that validates that version of you. But when you shift identities, even slightly, the brain updates its filters. Suddenly, you see possibilities you never noticed. You respond differently. You feel different. You interpret situations with greater clarity. Reality shifts because your brain stops replaying your past and begins projecting your future. This is the psychological foundation of a quantum shift. Your perception reorganizes, and your external world follows. Every timeline carries an emotional signature. The lower timeline feels like fear, shame, hypervigilance, collapse, self-protection, and overreaction. The higher timeline feels like clarity, courage, grounded presence, curiosity, expansion, and self-respect. When your emotional frequency shifts, even for a few seconds, you tune into a different version of reality. People respond differently. You make different choices. You feel empowered instead of overwhelmed. This is why emotional mastery is foundational. Not to control your emotions, but to consciously choose which emotional frequency you want to embody. The moment your frequency shifts, your timeline shifts. Another important element of quantum shifting is the physics of perception. You perceive reality through a selective attention system that decides what matters based on your identity. When you shift identity, your reticular activating system, the gateway between your conscious and unconscious mind, begins filtering the world differently. You see opportunities you used to miss. You recognize patterns faster. You notice emotional cues more clearly. You feel internal yes and no signals with sharp intuition. This perceptual upgrade alone can change the course of your life. Quantum shift is not only emotional, it is perceptual. When your perception upgrades, your choices upgrade, and your timeline accelerates. Reality does not shift slowly. It shifts in a 5-second window immediately after an emotional spike. In those 5 seconds, your brain chooses between repeating the old loop or creating a new one. If you collapse into the old emotional pathway, the loop strengthens. But if you interrupt the old identity and choose a new emotional stance, even briefly, something extraordinary happens. Your nervous system updates. Your emotional signature changes. Your timeline reorganizes. These 5 seconds are where the quantum shift is born, not in meditation, not in theory, but in the micro-moment where consciousness overrides autopilot. A timeline collapses the moment it becomes incompatible with your sense of self. When you stop identifying with the version of you who loops, fears, hides, or sabotages, that timeline loses its energetic foundation. Identity is what stabilizes a timeline. Remove the identity and the timeline dissolves. This is why certain patterns you once struggled with suddenly feel irrelevant. They no longer match your level of consciousness. They cannot influence you. They cannot pull you back. The old timeline collapses not because you fought it, but because you outgrew it. There is something else you need to understand. When you shift identities, the old identity collapses in stages. Psychologically, your brain begins pruning old neural pathways, a process called synaptic pruning, where emotional circuits you no longer use literally dissolve. Neurologically, your emotional triggers fire less because you are no longer feeding them with reaction and meaning. Energetically, the emotional charge weakens because your nervous system learns that survival no longer depends on those old behaviors. And in consciousness, the old identity loses authority because you no longer identify with its beliefs or fears. This multi-layered collapse creates the sensation of rapid transformation. Part of you dissolves, part of you is reborn. This moment often feels chaotic, but it is actually the clearest sign that your quantum shift is unfolding perfectly. Our quantum shift is ultimately an identity shift. It is the moment you say, I don't operate from that version of myself anymore. Identity is not something you wait for. Identity is something you choose. The moment you select a new identity, you activate a new emotional frequency, which activates a new timeline. The shift is not in your thoughts. It is in who you believe yourself to be. When you choose the identity of someone who does not loop, who does not collapse, who does not betray or abandon themselves, your emotional landscape reorganizes instantly. Identity, emotion, timeline, reality. Each time you create a new identity, the old identity releases what I call an identity echo, a brief return of old emotions, old beliefs, old impulses, or familiar fears. This does not mean you are regressing. It means the old identity is releasing its final attachments. The identity echo often feels like doubt, fear, insecurity, or an old urge to collapse. But if you recognize it as an echo rather than a truth, it dissolves quickly. When you can say, this is just the old me leaving my system, the new identity stabilizes faster, and the higher timeline locks in. Some quantum shifts feel instant because your internal system was already prepared. You had built the awareness, the emotional intelligence, the inner strength, and the shadow clarity. When the identity is ready, the shift feels like a snap, a click, a clear moment of, I'm done with this. The old reaction simply stops making sense. These instant shifts are not miracles. They are the final click of a long internal process. Other shifts feel messy because the nervous system is recalibrating. When you rise rapidly, your body temporarily loses familiarity. The old identity pulls at you. Old emotions spike. You question yourself. You feel turbulence. But this is not regression. It is integration. Chaos is simply your system adjusting to the new altitude. If you don't interpret the turbulence as failure, the shift completes much faster. You create a quantum shift intentionally through 4 steps. Pause, interrupt, choose, embody. Pause the emotional spike. Interrupt the old identity. Choose the version of you who does not loop. And embody that identity through breath, posture, tone, and micro-action. Identity is physical. When your body changes, your choices change. When your choices change, your timeline changes. A quantum shift is your nervous system, identity, and emotional frequency aligning into a new state with enough intensity to override the old one. A quantum shift begins with a single aligned choice, one made by your higher identity rather than your shadow identity. These choices are often small but powerful, setting a boundary, responding instead of reacting, telling the truth instead of collapsing, staying grounded instead of spiraling. Each of these is a vote for your higher timeline, and as you stack these votes, momentum builds, opportunities shift, energetic doors open, reality bends. You realize that quantum change is not dramatic. It is consistent alignment. After a shift, reality feels different but fragile. This is the stabilization phase. Your nervous system must learn to hold the new frequency without dropping into the old emotional gravity. You stabilize by making consistent micro-choices that match the new identity. You stabilize by noticing slips and choosing again. You stabilize by breathing into discomfort rather than interpreting it as failure. Stability comes from repetition, not intensity. What many people call nothing is happening is actually integration, the quiet phase where your nervous system absorbs the new identity and learns how to operate from it effortlessly. Integration looks like calmness, clarity, quiet, and an absence of chaos. Many people sabotage themselves because they mistake stillness for stagnation, but silence is where identity roots itself. Stillness is where timelines stabilize. Integration is the invisible victory before the visible shift. Eventually, the higher timeline becomes your default. You no longer have to force new behaviors, they emerge naturally. You don't collapse into old states, your body refuses to. Emotional triggers lose their power. You operate with clarity, intuition, strength, and self-respect. This is when the quantum shift completes. You have stabilized into your higher identity. The universe responds accordingly. And this brings us to the final piece, the activation of your new self. You are not just learning to shift timelines, you are learning to become the version of yourself who lives permanently on the higher timeline. In the next episode, we bring everything together: shadow, identity, loops, emotional frequency, nervous system stabilization, and alchemy, into a full embodiment ritual that locks in the new you. Until then, break the loop, shift the timeline, and become your higher self.